back in the day. Gonna take a break from our award-winning 8-Ball series and talk about something else. Ralph Greenleaf. Ralph Greenleaf, without a doubt. It's not even close.
It's dawn when
Podcast Pulling Around is an upcoming YouTube channel, and the agenda is to preserve the history of pool by interviewing older players, and getting the stories behind them and their adventures and their struggles. It's an interesting concept, and I applaud what they're doing. And one of their common questions is, if you could play anyone that ever lives and throughout the history of pool, who would you want to play? And so I'm taking it, they didn't ask me this, they didn't interview me, and they would have no business interviewing someone like me. But I'm going to take the liberty of answering that question for myself. That's just because I'm a sucker for interesting people and certain characters, and they don't even have to be pool players. I would just want to spend some time with Ralph Greenleaf for several reasons. It's not just that he's fascinating, but I believe I could have penetrated and made a difference in the final outcome of his life, which is not pretty. Yeah, not enough is written about this guy, so over my life I just had to kind of take pieces, and it helped being from Philadelphia, because this is where most of the story happens. To you writers out there looking to write the next Collar of Money, this is your story, man. This has everything in it. Everything you could want in a story. It's the story of Ralph Greenleaf. And tragically, his history is just getting lost with time. It's just getting buried. Nobody in today's pool world knows who this guy was or what he did. He died young. It was either age 50 or 51 on the streets of Philadelphia. That's not where he's from. He's from Illinois. It's just that all of his drinking buddies lived in Philadelphia because he spent a lot of time in Philadelphia. And that's because that's where Willie Mosconi is from. So Willie tried to help him. But it wasn't completely unselfish. Greenleaf was Willie's meal ticket, because it gets complicated. And the more you know, the more interesting it is. He 19-time world straight pool champion.
And I have tried my hardest, but nothing that I do makes you shine.
I believe he was better than Moscone, but he had a serious drinking problem. Serious alcoholic. If there's ever a real alcoholic, it was Ralph Greenleaf. So yeah, he eventually drank himself to death on the streets of Philadelphia. He died in an emergency room hospital, waiting to be seen by a doctor. He had that sidearm Keith McCready stroke, which is naturally developed in a very young player who can't reach the table and has no choice but to, shoot sidearm. And most players who learn like that, they grow up and they correct that sidearm stroke. But some people never correct it. Keith McCready mentioned that he tried to correct it at some point, and it just didn't work for him, so he kept. And I'm sure Greenleaf was the same way. In fact, Keith and Ralph have a lot in common. The big difference there is Keith could play when he was drinking, and Ralph just couldn't. Ralph's just a horrible, terrible, embarrassing pool player when he was drinking. The problem was he couldn't stop drinking, and literally he couldn't make a straight in 1 foot putt when he was drinking. And him and Willie were doing exhibitions for Brunswick Billiards, ultimately to sell pool tables. And when Ralph was drinking, it was just an embarrassing situation. And sometimes he wouldn't show up for the exhibition because he was drinking. You have to remember that this was during a time where most American males were standing in soup lines to get their next meal. And if it wasn't that they were fighting in wars and getting their heads blown off. It was a tough time in the history of America, and at the same time, here's these two pool players being offered a very lucrative deal from Brunswick, and all they had to do was show up at certain places and play each other in exhibition matches. Trusting Ralph to step up to this responsibility just wasn't working. The guy was too reckless, and if he showed up at all, he'd be drunk and won't be able to play. So Willie took on the father role, or actually kind of like the older brother role, and opened up his house for Greenleaf to live in, so Willie could babysit. Ralph made sure he stayed sober and showed up at these gigs. So yeah, and Willie wasn't known for his patience or understanding, or and Ralph was the complete opposite. He wore his heart on his sleeve, and he had a serious problem that needed serious medical attention. But before you read too much into that, I'm convinced that Willie did care about Ralph. It just wasn't his thing. It wasn't manly for a man to give a damn about another man. And that's just who he was. And yeah, he was trying to protect his own interests too, but I think, you can't not care about a friend who's self-destructing. And the arrangement worked for a little while. I'm not sure how long, but it ultimately, Ralph found the bottle again, and went back to self-destructing,
When you're here, you are not here.
We know a whole lot more about alcoholism today than we did in in the 1930s and 40s. That's for damn sure. So you have to bear that in mind too. I was a 19-time world straight pull champion. And I don't care what era you're talking about, you can't do that without being a great pool player. And I still say I'm pretty sure he was the best that ever lived when he was sober, which was rare. And none of it ended happily. Brunswick eventually filed lawsuits on Greenleaf, which Greenleaf flat out denied until the end. And as far as the friendship with Willie, that didn't end happily. Yeah, Willie was mad. He was mad as hell. And it's not a happy ending, so if you watch the movie, don't expect a happy ending. He eventually found a woman. The problem was she was just as nutty as he was. And he settled in Maryland for, I guess that's where she was from. And apparently that didn't work either. And life goes on, you know. The simple fact that he wound up back in Philadelphia living his final days kind of tells me a lot. The problem is it was too late. Anyone that ever tried to care about him had been hurt and disappointed so many times that, you know, there was nothing left. And that's what happens. People give up on you. No one technically dies of drinking themselves to death. There's no, on any obituary in the world, there's no drank himself to death. You die from the physical and mental complications that are caused by drinking, whether it's liver disease or kidney failure or suicide or whatever. You know, that's your technical reason of death. But the truth is, Ralph drank himself to death. Today's pool world has its share of Greenleafs, and it always will. Just because of the nature of the game and the subculture that's behind it all. It attracts a rebellious free spirit that still believes in freedom and living life by your standards and by your own rules. And it's like, just give me a straight piece of wood and it's me against the world. So I mean, that's what we have, and I think that this is what made Greenleaf so uncomfortable with the Brunswick deal. It's just suddenly, you know, my life is not in my control. It's in Willie Moscone's control and Brunswick's control, and now I have to wear a suit and act like a businessman and a respectable human being, and I'm just no longer allowed to be myself. It's like they're buying and selling me like an exotic piece of meat, and I think this is what he couldn't stand. He was like the ultimate free spirit, living life the way he wanted to live. There's a real fine line between brilliant genius and reckless idiot. And things that are either stunningly perfect and beautiful or just as ugly as life can get, you know.
I wait for the light tried my hardest